We're going to give it about 1 or 2 minutes to make sure everyone can log on. If you're already here and you have access to the chat, or maybe your teacher does, you can answer our question. Which of these is your favorite animal and why? Owl, possum, frog, or snake? If you're just joining us, we've got about 1 or 2 more minutes. We're going to wait for some others to join us. In the meantime, if you or your teacher has access to the chat, we'd love to know which of these is your favorite animal and why. Owl, possum, frog, or snake? Okay, I believe we're ready to begin. My name is Jessica, and I'm an educator at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in downtown Dallas. In just a minute, you're going to meet my friend Kristen, who's going to be talking with us today about some really cool animal adaptations. She's going to be asking us a lot of questions, what we think, our observations, and we really want everyone watching to participate. So if you have access to the chat, or maybe your teacher does, we'd love for you to share all your answers and your questions about the animals there in the chat. If not, you can think about it to yourself, or if you have a science notebook or a spare piece of paper, you can record your answers there. Or if there's someone else in the room with you, you can discuss your observations and answers with each other. But again, if you do have access to the chat or your teacher does, we'd love to hear your questions and the answers to ours. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kristen to get us started.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen, and Miss Jessica is right. We are talking about animals and their adaptations that help them to survive in their habitat. So what does an animal need in order to survive? You might have said food, water, shelter, sunlight, air to breathe, and those are all correct. All of these things an animal can find, they find within their habitat, and that's like their home or where they live. They also need to find ways to protect themselves, ways to move around, and their habitat provides them with all of that. But these adaptations are either physical things about their bodies or behaviors or actions that animals do that really help them to survive and thrive within that habitat. I think my favorite animal is a frog. So I think I'm going to start with a frog this time. So I'm going to set him here on the table. And what I want you to do is I want you to observe the frog for just a minute or so. And I want you to make some observations. What does he look like? Where do you think he lives? What do you think it eats? And what do you observe about the body that might help him within that environment? So I really love talking about the frogs, and you'll hear me say that about all the animals that we talk about today, is that I love them. I think they're all super cute or super strange, and it's just really interesting to me. So the frog is probably my favorite to talk about. And the first thing I want to talk about that you probably know about frogs already is that long, sticky tongue that they have. And that is an adaptation for eating their food. What does a frog eat? Frogs eat bugs and other insects, and that long, sticky tongue is going to help them catch those insects. Now, does that make frogs herbivores, plant eaters? No. And they're not omnivores either, because omnivores eat both plants and meat. So that means that frogs are technically carnivores, or more specifically, an insectivore. So they eat primarily insects. And we talked about the long, sticky tongue, but there's actually a second adaptation or a second thing that they do to help them swallow their food. And this, you'll have to watch videos of a frog or a toad eating, but it's really cool. And what they do is they use their eyes to help them swallow their food. So what happens is they close their eyelids and they actually push their eyes down into their mouths, and that helps push the food down their throat, which is super gross, but really, really cool. Yeah. Frogs also have a really nice pointed nose, and they have some nostrils here at the front that helps them to breathe, but they also absorb or exchange, air exchange happens through their moist skin as well. So frogs are amphibians, and they live partly in water and partly out of water. And they have this nice, smooth, moist or shiny skin most of the time. And they'll be found really close to water sources. So if we look at their feet, it looks like they have webbed feet. How might that help in their environment? Yeah, those webbed feet are going to help them to maneuver around their environment and help keep them from sinking into the mud. Also help them jump or hop away. Are these long legs, and if you look at them, they're really muscular. And that's where the strength comes from, is behind their jumps, is those legs and how long they are. So if we look at their skeleton really quick, we can see the legs. They're so long. So there's 1, 2, and then the foot. Now, bullfrogs specifically, so this is a bullfrog skeleton. Bullfrogs can get up to a pound and almost 18 inches in length. And most of the length is going to be from those legs, which I think is super cool. They're actually one of the largest true frogs in North America. And then you can also see they don't have any bones between their eyes and the bottom of their mouth, which is also why they push their eyes into their skulls or into their mouths, which I think is really fascinating. If we look at a toad skeleton, toads actually have much shorter legs. So they're not, they might hop or, try to walk or crawl away, but they're not going to jump nearly as far as a frog would. And that's because they don't have the power like a frog does coming from those legs, because their back legs are so much shorter. But they have the similar, a very similar skull. And so they will also use their eyes to help them swallow their food. And they also have webbed feet as well to help them keep from sinking into the mud.
We've had a lot of good observations come in. We've already talked about several of them. We have a what will happen question, which are always fun to answer. What will happen if a frog didn't have a tongue but could still catch flies? Is there another way it can help get its food?
That's a good question, and I don't know exactly how they would adapt. They might adapt to eat a different food instead of insects, which would require a different set of adaptations. I really don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know how to answer that. It really also depends on what's around in their environment and what kind of insects there are. Are the insects always flying, or are they on the ground? So that could vary too. Is there another question, Ms. Jessica? You said there were a couple.
Oh, mostly we had observations that we talked about. We have, why are their legs like that? I think Kristen showed us how long their legs are. And some of you guys were talking about them jumping. So they're like that, so they can get a really good jump, right, Kristen?
Yeah, and jumping is actually a way that they will protect themselves. So when they feel threatened or scared, they're going to jump away from their predators. And their predators might be things like owls, possums, snakes, raccoons, things like that. And they're going to try and jump away from those predators in order to protect themselves. Another way they'll protect themselves is through camouflage. So if you look at the skin and the color of it, that's going to help them blend in or camouflage with their environment, hoping that they can stay hidden away from those predators. Toads, so if I have a toad here, toads actually protect themselves through camouflage as well, but they also secrete poison from a gland behind their eyes. And I'll show it, I think this view is better. They have these glands right behind their eyes, and that helps them, and that secretes a poison. And this poison is really bitter tasting, and they're hoping that if something picks it up in their mouth and they secrete that poison, that bitterness will cause them to spit the toad out, and the toad can then get away. But they can't jump nearly as far. So that's an adaptation that they have that some frogs do and some frogs don't. So some frogs can be poisonous. Another difference that you see in toads is that they have this bumpy skin. Toad skin is a little bit thicker. They can be a little bit farther from a water source than a frog can be. And the other thing is they have a really rounded nose, whereas the frog is kind of more pointed. It's very pointed and they're very rounded. And then the body style as well. See how lean and athletic the bullfrog looks versus the toad.
Going back to their eyes helping them swallow their food, does the brain help it swallow the food too?
I don't think so. From what I've looked up, I think it's just the eyes that they push down, and it's the muscles in their eyelids that actually pushes the eyes down.
How long do they live?
Well, this is going to depend on what frog or toad you are looking at and talking about. So I don't really have a super great answer for the bullfrog, I don't think. I had a hard time looking for snake and amphibian lifespans, so I'm not really sure.
You showed us a few differences already between a frog and a toad, but we did get a question. So is a frog different from a toad? So are there any other like real big differences?
Leg length, bumpy skin, the noses are slightly different. Trying to think. Toads can be a little bit farther from their water source than a frog can. And just the overall like body shape is a little bit different just because frogs are a little bit leaner than the toads are.
So we know really that toads have the bumpy skin, but why do they have bumpy skin?
It's just the bump specifically, I'm not really sure. It might have something to do with how thick the skin is and that skin being able to retain moisture a little bit better than the frogs can.
And I see one more, and then we'll probably need to move on. Sorry if I interrupted you. Did you need to finish that answer?
Oh, no, you're okay. I was just going to say that, you know, you generalize it that frogs have smooth skin and toads have bumpy skin, but it can be vice versa. So it's not, you know, all frogs have smooth skin. Some frogs will have some bumpy skin too.
So I think the one that we'll have time for, what will they do if they lost their parents? Maybe a little bit on their life cycle?
Okay, so most frogs are, most frogs do not take care of their young. Most frogs lay eggs in a wet water source. And those jelly-like eggs then hatch into tadpoles. Tadpoles have gills and they live in water completely. They're little herbivores. And then they turn into toadlets or froglets. And they have almost like a tadpole, but kind of with legs. And then they turn into frogs or toads. And that's a life cycle called metamorphosis, where different stages of their lives, their body looks completely different. And not all frogs or toads will go through all of those things, but most frogs or toads don't look after their eggs, or they might look after the eggs, but after the frogs are born, they're kind of on their own. Some frogs will hold on to the eggs on their back, or they will take care of where the eggs have been laid, but it's not always. So it's a little different depending on what type of frog you're looking at.
We have a lot more frog questions, and we could probably spend hours just talking about frogs, but we want to learn about some other animals today too, so we're going to move on. We might have time at the end to come back to them, but if not, we definitely encourage you to look up the answers and learn more at home. But I did have a question come in that applies to the frog, but also the rest of our ones. Are the ones you have real or not?
Oh, that's a very good question. The ones I have here are real. But real does not mean alive. So these are all taxidermy specimens that have died in some way, and they've been stuffed. They have metal inside of them, so they maintain their shape, and then they've been stuffed and preserved for us to use for educational purposes. So they're real, but they're not alive.
And then I saw a question a few minutes ago, kind of in the middle of all the frog questions. What is a possum? Should we talk about possum now?
So let's talk about the possums. Okay, so let me set them up. Let's see. I want you to make some observations about the possum. I'll give you some time to put it in the chat or talk about it on your own or record it in your science journal. But remember, whenever you're making observations, to think about where do you think a possum lives? What do you think a possum might eat? How does a possum protect themselves?
I think we need to petition for a possum emoji. I had to use a mouse one in the chat, but I think it looks like his little face.
Yeah, it does. Again, I love possums. They're adorable. And I think I said that about the frogs too, but they're just so cute. And I know Miss Jessica feels the same way.
Okay, we have some observations coming in. It's furry, maybe it's dirty looking, lives in the woods, wild animals.
Yeah, those are great observations. So they're going to live in they can live in wooded environments like a forest. They can also live here in the urban environment like the city. They're nocturnal, which means that they are awake at night and asleep during the day, which is why they've been able to really succeed here in urban areas, because we're all asleep whenever they're awake. Yeah, they do look kind of dirty, don't they? Here, let me zoom in on their pelt really quick. Talk about their fur. They are furry mammals.
Hairy, so that goes right along with it.
Yeah. Possums have fur. They are mammals. They're a type of mammal called a marsupial, and they're actually the only marsupial in North America. But if you look at their pelt, it's white underneath and dark on top. I don't really think that they would be great at camouflaging with their environment, but it really just depends on where they are and how dark or light it is and where they're living or trying to blend in with. But I guess this dark stuff might help blend in with the leaves and the brush on the ground or the dirt. But I don't think they'd be super successful at blending in with their environment. They do other things in order to protect themselves. But let's look at, while I have this view up, let's look at their skull. So this is the skull of a possum. Skull of a possum. Here's their nose and their canines. And if we look at their teeth here, do you think, looking at their skull and their teeth, do you think a possum is a carnivore, meat eater, omnivore, plants and meat, or herbivore, plant eater? They are actually an omnivore. So they will use these sharp canines to help tear meat off of prey if they eat it, like little mice or other little rodents and insects. But they might also use these back teeth to crush nuts, berries, seeds. They might even get into our trash here in the city, and they'll even eat dead things. So they might be little scavengers too. They're considered an omnivore. We can see this crest right here. That's great for muscle attachment, and their brain would be right back in here. And they actually have a really good sense of smell. So this long snout actually increases the surface area inside their nose, and it gives them a great sense of smell. And that's one of the ways that they can seek out their food, is by using that sense of smell. If we go back to this big picture, said that they're a mammal, but they're technically a marsupial, and a marsupial is it's a mammal that gives birth to live babies, but then those babies go into a pouch for more or longer time. So possums, whenever they have babies, they're only about the size of a honeybee, which is really small. And then they have to make it into the pouch, and the pouch, the little baby possums will stay there for about 3 months. And then after those 3 months, they hang onto the back of the mom for another 2 weeks. And then after that, they'll start to walk on their own. And one of the really super cute, adorable things that baby possums do whenever they start to wander off, if they get lost from their mom, they will actually make little sneezy noises. And that's how the mom will be able to locate the baby possums.
Okay, we have a lot of awesome questions from you guys. So I have, do possums act dead for real? And someone thinks that they do and wants to know why.
Okay, we can start with that. So everything that we've pretty much talked about so far has been a physical adaptation, something about the body of the possum, right? Except for maybe their nocturnalness. But their nocturnalness and the fact that they play dead are behavioral adaptations. So playing dead is an action or something that they do in order to protect themselves. And what happens is whenever they feel threatened or scared, it's an involuntary response. So the brain automatically causes this response, and the possums can't control it. But what happens is their breathing slows down and their heart rate slows down, and they hope that an animal or predator will think that they are dead and will not be interested any longer with the possum. So they play dead in order to protect themselves, but it's involuntary, so they can't control it when it happens. I know that in my yard, my dog has come across a possum one time, and that possum was not scared enough to play dead from my dog. And what they did was they stood on the fence and they bared their teeth and kind of made like hissy noises towards my dog. And that's all that happened. So I haven't seen a possum play dead in real life, but it does happen.
Who are the predators they're trying to protect themselves against?
So their predators might be things like coyotes or bobcats. I think they're a little too big for snakes, but maybe things like birds of prey, like owls and hawks, even foxes, things like that.
What about, do they live in the city and are they dangerous?
They do live in the city. I wouldn't necessarily think that and I think that maybe you're asking if they're dangerous to humans. I wouldn't necessarily think that they're dangerous to humans. We're a lot bigger than they are, and they're most likely going to feel threatened by us. So they'll probably just try to run away. But I wouldn't hold out food in my hand for a possum either. I would just let them be. And yes, they do live here in the city because they're awake at night whenever we're asleep. And so they go through our trash and the little rodents that live in our neighborhoods and amphibians, toads, and frogs. So they've really found that they can take advantage of city life.
Well, this is a good question. Do the babies play dead too?
You know, I don't know how old they have to be in order to play dead. So maybe it's something I'd have to look up. I don't know when they actually, if that's a learned behavior. Well, it's not a learned behavior. It's an involuntary reaction from their body. So it's quite possible that they do, but I'm not 100% sure. And I want to make this known. I don't know everything about these animals, so some of your questions I won't know the answers to, and that's okay. But I'm going to take them home with me, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to look up the questions and learn the answers, so that way the next time someone asks me something, I can answer that question a little bit better. So I encourage you after our program to look up the possums or the toads or any animals that we talk about today, and you'll learn a lot more than the one thing that you looked for, and it's really interesting.
What about their tails? Anything cool there?
Yeah, their tails, it's actually a prehensile tail, which means that they use this tail as a fifth limb. And some of you may have seen or heard that possums can hang upside down from their tails. And that's partially true and partially not true. So there's some conditions for it. Yes, they can hang upside down from their tails while they're young. So their tail can only support their full body weight for a period of time. Eventually, the adults get so heavy that the tail cannot support the whole weight of the possum. So if you do see a possum hanging upside down from the tree, it's more than likely a young or a juvenile possum, so something that's not fully grown.
Okay, I think the possum is so cute and interesting, and I again think we could probably talk about him for a whole hour, but we're gonna go ahead and move on. And again, we'll try to come back to some of your possum questions. And if we don't get a chance today, look up the answers because there's so much to learn.
Okay, I think I want to do our snake next. Snakes are super cool. A lot of people are scared of them, which is fair, but they're really, really cool. So again, make some observations. What do you know? What do you wonder? What do you think that they eat and where do they live? How do they protect themselves? They're all great questions to think about. Okay, so I'm actually going to switch this view really quick. And I want to talk about their camouflage so that I can see it better here. Okay, so snakes, a lot of snakes will use camouflage in order to protect themselves and their environment, and they'll try to blend in with their environment. So this is actually a Western Diamondback rattlesnake, so it's named for those diamonds that are on the back pattern. And snakes are reptiles, which means they have scales. Unlike the amphibians or the frogs, they have that smooth, moist skin. Reptiles have scales. And they shed their skin from time to time. And sometimes it's more often than others. It depends on a couple of things, like how dry or wet the conditions are as to how often they shed. But what's cool is they shed it all at one time. So if I look at this as a skin, this is a shed from a snake. They even shed the skin up of their eyelids, which I think is really cool. And they shed it over their entire body all the way down to the tail. Now, rattlesnakes, instead of losing all their shed, the very last little bit of their shed is actually turned into the rattle that's on their tail. And they'll shake this up to 60 times per second as a warning for other humans, or other animals, really, not just humans. But I started by talking about their camouflage, because not all snakes and animals use camouflage to blend in with their environment. Some snakes and other animals, like insects and frogs, they use camouflage differently. And this is called Post-Somatic Camouflage. And they're really brightly colored to alert other animals that they are dangerous. They might be poisonous or venomous, or they might just taste really badly. And hoping that other animals will see those bright colors and not eat it. The other thing that's happening here is that this is two different types of snakes. One of them is very venomous, and the other is harmless. They're not, I wouldn't say harmless. Anything with a mouth can bite, so it can be dangerous, but they don't have any venom. So it's not going to be a venomous snake. And what it's doing is it's mimicking the venomous snake. So if we look closely at the patterns of their skin, we have this one where red is sandwiched between yellow, and then it's sandwiched between black. Whereas this snake, we have red sandwiched between black and then yellow. So a very slight difference in this color pattern. But what's happening is that this king snake is trying to mimic the coral snake. And the coral snake is very venomous, but the king snake is not. So he's just hoping that other animals mistake it for the coral snake and leave him alone. And this is called mimicry. He's just mimicking the color pattern of the coral snake, hoping that other animals will leave him alone. So I think that's a really cool use of camouflage.
We have several questions about different kinds of snakes while we're on this topic. One, I can answer. How many different snakes are there? There are over 3,000 species of snakes in the world. And even just here in Texas, there's a little bit over 100 different kinds. But we also had some questions. What's the most dangerous snake? And are there friendly snakes?
I do not know the most dangerous snake. And it really depends on what area you're looking at and what snakes are going to be present, because the most dangerous snake in this area might not be a dangerous snake, in Florida. I don't know. That's a good question. And I tend to think of rattlesnakes as pretty friendly. And that reason is because of their rattle and what they do with it. So camouflage would be a physical adaptation, something that they do or something about their body that helps them to survive. But the rattle and the action that they perform, the shaking, is actually a behavioral adaptation. And it's what they do with it that's pretty friendly. Snakes are not offensive, rattlesnakes, meaning that they're not looking for humans to go and bite a human. What happens whenever a rattlesnake bites a human is that they have felt threatened. So what happens whenever a snake is in an area and a human comes towards it, or another predator? They will shake their rattle up to 60 times per second, and it's almost like a warning sign. They're trying to say, excuse me, I camouflage with my environment really well, and you may not see me, but I'm here and I might bite you if I continue to feel threatened. So please listen and go away. And what you should do if you're on a hiking trail or something like that and you hear this noise is you should actually pause, listen to where that rattling sound is coming from, try to locate it, and then go in the opposite direction. The last thing you want to do is panic and actually run into a rattlesnake. So this rattle is actually kind of friendly. It's like a friendly warning sign to us. So I kind of think of them as friendly. But some snakes can be more friendly, especially the ones that you have as pets, because they're more, they're used to human interaction. And so they're just, I don't know, more used to it, and they don't feel threatened by humans. But the ones out in the wild will feel threatened by humans, and they will not necessarily be friendly.
Does this snake have a lot of bones?
They do, actually. I know we think they don't have limbs like arms and legs, so do they have bones? And the question to that is, yes, they do have bones. They have a skeleton just like we do. They have this nice backbone that goes all the way down their body. And then all of these little bones that come off of it are ribs. Like our ribs protect our lungs, their ribs protect almost their entire body. They do have a skeleton.
What about the longest snake?
I do not know that one off the top of my head. I'm sorry, Miss Jessica.
Let's see, it looks like the anacondas, pythons, and boa constrictors. There might be some different ones depending on if you're looking at their length or their weight, but it's in that family that seem to be the biggest ones. Able to look that up real fast. Very interesting. How do snakes survive extreme weather?
So some snakes will hibernate depending on how the weather is, and they'll usually find these dens and slow their metabolism down and kind of sleep it off, just kind of like a bear does. Other snakes, if the weather is more like temperate and even throughout the year, they'll just change when they're active. So reptiles are ectotherms, which means that they cannot manage the temperature of their body from within. They need heat from sunlight in order to maintain their body temperature. And what they'll do is if it's a really hot summer, they'll be active more at night when the temperature is cooler. But in the winter, whenever it's warmer during the day, that's when they'll be more active, and then they'll sleep at night in a den. So it really depends on where they are and what precautions they have for it. So some will hibernate and some will not.
What about how they eat?
That's just where I was about to go, Miss Jessica. So if we look at my taxidermy here, try to be careful with him, we can see his mouth and his teeth. Snakes will eat their prey whole. And that might be little mice, insects, even little lizards, or if there is a frog or an amphibian, might do that too. And we can look at their teeth, and I'm going to actually show you a skull. This is a skull of a western diamondback rattlesnake, so the same snake we were just observing. We can see that they have fangs. This is where that venom is going to come from. And that's one way that they use the venom to protect themselves. Some snakes might use it as a way to catch their prey. They'll kind of sneak up on it, bite it, inject the venom, and then let it go. And whenever that venom takes effect and finally kills the little tiny mouse or a lizard, the snake will then use its tongue and follow the scent and then swallow its prey whole. And they have really loose attachments here at the back of the jaw, and that allows them to open their mouth really wide and swallow that food whole. But the other thing that we can notice is their teeth. Their teeth actually have this rounded shape to them. And what that's good for is they don't have arms, right? They can't just hold the food in their mouth. So what they do if their food is still wiggling around in their mouth and trying to get out, what happens is they actually get punctured on those teeth again, trying to escape the mouth. I did mention that the Western Diamondback rattlesnake is venomous. So really quick, I want to go over venom versus poison because they can both be harmful to humans, but it's all about how it gets into our body. That's the difference. So frogs and toads and things like poison ivy are poisonous. And that's because the poison enters our body through touching it or through eating it, kind of like our dog. If they pick up a toad, they might foam with the mouth. That poison is going into their mouth. Venom enters our body through that bite. So it's injected into our body. So that's how the difference between poison and venom. So poison is something that we absorb through our skin or ingest. Venom is something that is injected into our body. But like I said, it can both be harmful to humans.
We just have a few minutes left. So do you think we could talk about my favorite animal for just a little bit?
Yeah, I think we can. So Miss Jessica's favorite is our great horned owl. So I'll give you just a minute to make some observations. So the first thing that I notice about the owl are those really big eyes. And owls have huge eyes in comparison to their skulls. It takes up a lot of space within their skull. And those eyes are great because they have a really great sense of sight, but it's really helpful whenever they're hunting. Owls are carnivores, so they are meat eaters, and what they're going to look for are little rodents, frogs, amphibians, little mice, chipmunks, things that are scurrying around on the floor of the forest. And they're going to use that eyesight to hunt at night. So they are nocturnal. They're awake at night and sleep during the day. And they also have a really cool sense of hearing, and that is awesome. It helps them out a lot. Their ears are actually asymmetrical, which means that one ear is higher than the other. And that will allow them to hear to one side and up above, and then down on the other side and below. And so it's almost like surround sound for an owl. And that is extremely helpful whenever they're sitting, perching on the branch, listening and listening and looking and waiting for their prey. When they find their prey, they hear it, right? That'll help pinpoint the location. They're going to swoop down from the branches where they've been sitting and listening and scoop it up really quick with their talons. And you might be able to get a good view here of their talons. But if I switch it really quick, we can see that they actually have 3 that point forward and 1 that points back. And this is going to help them, one, to hold on to the branches, but also whenever they swoop down to collect their prey, they're going to grab it with their talons really quick, and then they're going to fly back up into the trees where they feel safe, and that's where they'll eat it.
That kind of answers the question I saw first of why they don't have hands. They're using their talons to do some of those things that we might use our hands with. Here's another one. Are their ears?
So as I said, their ears are asymmetrical. So, and they're not right here underneath these tufts of fur, but they would be underneath some of the feathers. And if you look it up online, I don't have a good picture here. You just kind of pull the feathers apart and you'll find where that ear is. And it's actually really cool to look at them, but also super weird. So have fun with that, but they are really cool. Just kind of like open holes into the ear. But yeah, so they're asymmetrical. So one is just higher than the other.
Are owl eyes similar to cat eyes?
I think you mean that they glow at night whenever you're making that comparison. And I think so. So owl's eyes they're like bell-shaped, which means there's more surface area at the back for photoreceptors. But I think they have what's called a tapetum lucidum, which is something that cats and dogs do have and why their eyes glow at night. And it's an extra layer towards the back of their eye that whenever light comes in, it reflects back. And so it can come back again. And it actually increases the amount of light inside the eye so they can have better night vision. We do not have that adaptation. If you ever use the flash on a camera, our eyes end up looking red, and that's because we have a bunch of blood vessels at the back of our eyes. We do not have what's called a tapetum lucidum at the back of our eyeballs, but I think owls do. Let's see. Oh, owls can turn their heads around, but not all the way around. They can't turn it all the way to the back, but they can turn their head 270 degrees, which is 3/4 of a circle. So they're really missing this area at the back here, about a 90-degree angle behind them. And humans cannot do that. Humans, we only have 7 vertebrae here in our neck, but owls can have up to 14 bones within their neck, and they have extra blood vessels that help them keep their brain with blood circulating in it whenever they do turn their heads to those weird angles. And that's good because they can't actually move their eyes. Our eyes are kind of set in place. So if they want to look at something, they have to be able to move their whole head. They're not like humans where we have muscles attached to our eyeballs and we can move them around and roll them. Do I have time to mention the camouflage? Yes, a couple of minutes. If we look at owls, since they're asleep at night, since they're asleep during the day and awake at night, they need to protect themselves from animals that are awake during the day. And that includes camouflaging themselves while they're sleeping. So we can look at the pattern of the feathers and the pattern of the bark on the tree and see how similar those things look. And that will help them to camouflage or blend in with their environment. They will also fly away if they feel threatened. Even though this owl looks relatively large, they only get to about 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. And that's because they have hollow bones and the feathers are really light. And whenever they eat, they actually don't hold on to any of the solid pieces like bones and fur, things that the owl can't digest. They actually spit that up into an owl pellet and only hold on to the stuff that they can digest. And that makes them lighter so that way they can fly away a little bit faster after they eat.
We have a couple of questions about how they live. Do they live in cold or hot or warm weather? And do they live forever?
They do not live forever. I do know that, but they do have a pretty long lifespan. And I wrote this down. Let me see if I can find it because I was also interested in it. The average lifespan for a great horned owl in the wild is about 13 years, which is pretty long. In captivity, so like in a zoo or something like that, they can live about 20 years. I don't think that certain owls will live in very cold environments, like a snow owl. Other owls can live in something more temperate, or we even have things like Miss Jessica's absolute favorite, the burrowing owl, which lives in a desert environment. So owls can live all over the place, really.
I think
which is really cool.
For one more that came in, can owls hear from far away?
They can. So their ears are they actually have a really great sense of hearing. And not only is it good for hearing things far away, but it's really good for location. So they can hear, since they have those asymmetrical ears, they can really pinpoint where that sound is coming from. And that really helps them to know which way to fly away from if they feel threatened, or know which way to go if they're hunting prey.
Well, I know that I learned a lot today about these 4 animals and adaptations in general. So I hope everyone watching did as well. I know you guys have a lot more questions, so keep learning. Kristen and I are learning new things every day. Scientists are learning new things every day about these creatures. So keep being curious and keep learning, and we hope to see you again sometime soon.
Bye.